tell me why coal seam gas is good, why it's good for the economy, why it's good for Australia.
Well, coal seam gas, it's not particularly new in Australia. In fact, we've been doing it in Queensland for about 16 years. But what's new about the industry is that we've discovered that we have so much resource that we're now able to build an export industry on the back of coal seam gas. In fact, the CSIRO have estimated that we have in excess of 200 years of coal seam gas on the east coast of Australia. The benefits of that, there's probably three key benefits. The first is the opportunity that it represents for regional communities. As a country, we've been wringing our hands for quite some decades now about what to do in relation to dying communities and dying regional areas. The coal seam gas industry represents an opportunity for revitalising those communities. And we hear a lot about farming communities and so on who get very concerned that their sons and their daughters are going to have to go to Sydney or Brisbane or Melbourne for well-paid jobs and careers. Well, the coal seam gas industry represents an opportunity for those families to stay put in these regional centres. The second key benefit is, of course, the fact that it represents quite a significant economic opportunity for New South Wales and for Queensland. In Queensland alone, the estimate is that the royalties that will result from the coal seam gas industry will be around the $1 billion a year mark. And of course that translates into quite significant expenditure for schools and health and hospitals and police and so on. And the third and perhaps most underappreciated opportunity is if in Australia we're going to take climate change seriously, we need to acknowledge that the renewable energy, it's not as simple as turning from coal to renewable energy overnight. For a variety of reasons, including cost, including reliability, efficiency, that's just not going to be possible. Coal seam gas, or natural gas more broadly, represents a very significant opportunity for Australia to take its greenhouse gas obligations seriously and to move not just Australia to a cleaner energy burning future, but through the export industry, our region more broadly.
Nationally, give us a picture of what the potential is and how big the reserves are. Just if you can, to kind of sum up nationally if you can.
Well, when we're talking about coal seam gas, we really are only talking about New South Wales and Queensland. We've got conventional gas, of course, elsewhere in Australia. You've heard about the North West Shelf, people have heard about the New Gorgon project, Cooper Basin where we have gas reserves at the moment, Bass Strait, of course. But coal seam gas is very much a northern New South Wales and Queensland industry. And that's for a variety of reasons. It just so happens that the coal seams there are geologically and technically are able to support a very significant industry. CSIRO have estimated that reserves on the east coast, so the reserves of coal seam gas, are enough to power, if we were to translate it into electricity generation, a city of 1 million people for something like 5,000 years.
How safe is it in terms of the environment?
So it's been very exhaustively examined as part of both federal environmental impact assessment processes and state government environmental impact assessment processes. They have employed hundreds of experts in a variety of different areas to assess these projects, and after the thorough review have given the green light to 2 very substantial export projects which will be developed on the back of the coal seam gas industry, and in fact led to the imposition of something like 1,500 plus conditions on each of those projects. So how safe is it? They have found, those experts have found that that subject to those conditions, it's a safe industry that done properly, well regulated, managed appropriately, should not pose a threat to human health or to safety.
How do you judge the environmental risks of coal seam gas?
Well, I'm not a hydrologist. You're not a hydrologist. Fortunately, we're not the ones making the assessments of these projects. What I can say is that these processes have employed Australia and overseas the best experts that there are available, and so it's not for me to judge. It is for those who have the expert advice to determine what is appropriate conditions to be attached to these projects, and as a consequence of that, governments, and on the advice of those people, have given the green lights to those projects.
Sure. There's been a lot of doubts and a lot of claims of risks involved with the projects. I mean, there's a long list. I mean, we can start with the federal process, where you've got Geo Australia. Were quite critical. They say that the claims that the companies, in this case, which was QGC and Santos, claiming couldn't be substantiated in their EISs. The water group in the same process said it could be 1,000 years of damage.
Again, I'm not a hydrologist. I'm not an expert on environmental assessment. But what I can say is that the governments have employed they've certainly employed the experts that you've referred to, plus a number of others. And it's to them that they've gone to for advice in determining whether or not they should give a green light to these projects. On the basis of that advice they have, and they have attached what the governments have felt to be appropriate conditions that will regulate how those projects are built and operated. One of the things the industry doesn't have yet, because it's reasonably new, is a track record. And until it builds up that track record, I think there is an acceptance that there'll always be a level of doubt, there'll be a level of fear, and there'll be, to some extent, I guess, a concern amongst people. People don't want to see risk. And certainly we can't say we know everything now because it's new. What we can do, though, is to ensure and support strong regulatory regimes and strong measures that will be applied if there is, for example, any impact that should occur.
These are the independent scientists, Geoscience Australia, the water group within the department, the National Water Commissioner, John Hillier, who was the principal hydrologist in Queensland, even JP Morgan, are saying there's serious issues and risks to the environment. We should know more about it, considering the size and scope of what is to come before it should proceed.
This is a question, I guess, that's probably best put to the regulators. But what I can say as a representative of the industry as a whole is that these issues were exhaustively looked at through the environmental impact assessment process. And wherever there was an identified risk, there were conditions, there have been conditions that have been designed to deal with those risks as part of the conditions for those projects going ahead.
Sure. Most of the conditions are about regulating and also about managing the problems if they occur. They're not actually about dealing with the problems before they occur. And this is the issue that a lot of these scientists are saying, that it's too big an experiment to just say, let's have a gamble.
The general consensus from what we've heard, the general consensus is in fact that the likelihood of there being an impact on water quality and water quantity is minimal. Then, quite legitimately and quite appropriately, it then goes on to say, well, because we haven't had this industry before, we need to make sure that even no matter how remote the chance of there being an impact is, we need to make sure that there are processes in place to ensure that impact is managed.
But not stop. That's the point. That's what they're saying. It's managed. And there's a question of whether it actually, A, can be managed and B, actually fixed up.
Presumably those who made the decisions about these projects have the confidence that if there is, and it's a big if, because the consensus view is that the impact is likely to be minimal, if at all. So it's a big if. But if there is an impact, they have made a judgment call that they can be managed and they will be managed.
I mean, the other big issue, hot topic here is fracking. I mean, is it safe?
Fracking is nothing new. Fracking has been occurring since the 1950s. It's got better and better since that time with technological development, and as we've learned more, it's very widely used around the world. It's safe, it's been exhaustively investigated, and all of those investigations have found that if done properly, and again properly regulated, that fracking does not pose a threat. And in all of those studies there's been no evidence of that fracking results in some of the contamination that's been suggested.
Do you know what's in the fracking fluids?
There's a whole bunch of different chemicals that are used in addition to what is primarily water and sand. Those chemicals are publicly available. They differ from project to project depending on the nature and the circumstances of the project.
Okay. And the issue here is that, sure, you know the chemicals, but you don't know the formulas. Of course, you're never going to know them because that's going to be a company's commercial advantage to know exactly how they do it, when they're doing it, like any commercial enterprise. And that's the point, isn't it? That you're never actually going to know the formulas.
Well, we know that 99% of those of fracking fluids is sand and water. What's used for that remaining 1%, as I say, will vary from project to project. But the list of chemicals is widely known. The proportions of them, as you say, will be commercial information. But the key issue...
So you don't know the formulas then?
Well, we know what chemicals are used. Everyone is available.
What I'm saying is you don't know the formulas on how much those chemicals are used and what parts.
1%, only 1% of those of fracking fluids is made up of chemicals.
No, I understand. In that 1% is what I'm talking about. Do you know the formulas of that 1% and how they're used?
The formulas will differ from project to project, and that's commercial in confidence information held by the companies.